So I'm going to be doing my presentation on female sex offenders. So the study of sex offending in general has pretty much entirely focused on the male sex offender with very little emphasis on female sex offenders. It wasn't until the 1990s that female sex offenders started being more systematically studied. This is likely due to the lack of prevalence of female sex offenders, as well as this preconception that female sexual offending is somehow less harmful or harmless even. Unfortunately, this preconception has led to the creation of a dark figure of crime in this area due to lack of reporting. So the point of this presentation is basically to provide you with a better understanding of the enigma that is the female sex offender. This is done through comparison with male sex offenders as well as female non-sexual offenders. So in regards to offender characteristics between males and females, both male and female reported incidences of childhood abuse, substance abuse, and psychological diagnoses, and a pattern of a criminal history. However, there are differences among these categories. For example, females were more likely to be sexually and emotionally victimized in adulthood, either through partner violence or rape incidences. And furthermore, males, there has been a discovery of a link between a psychopathic disturbance and male sexual offending, but there's very little evidence to support that it's even a risk factor among female sex offenders. Furthermore, female sex offenders are more likely to be younger, less likely to be black, and less likely to use a substance like alcohol during an offense. There are similarities among those last three, though, that tie females and males together a little bit. For example, males and females are more likely to be adults when they offend, and they're more likely to be Caucasian. And while males do utilize alcohol more during the offense, both incidences with males and females are rare. So the biggest difference in the offense characteristics between males and females involved co-offending behavior. So original studies suggest that females are more likely to co-offend and that it accounts for the majority of female sexual crime. These studies often depicted females as being secondary participants to a male co-offender who might have coerced through fear to get them to participate in the act. Recent studies, however, that include this table have come out that have slightly contradicted the original findings. So the gist of what is shown here is that females are more likely to offend in groups than male sexual offenders, and the presence of a male co-offender is 3 times more likely with a female sexual offender. However, while co-offending is a large proportion of female sexual offending, as it sits around 32.5%, you can see clearly that it is not the predominant one. They offend solo 61.9% of the time. So this contradicts earlier findings that label them as secondary coerced participants. This is important information to know because it establishes them as being intentional abusers and not just going along for the ride. So female sexual offenders are more likely to experience greater overall trauma in childhood. So this includes physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, as well as physical neglect in comparison with female non-sexual offenders. So this contradicts earlier findings that found there were no differences in the severity of sexual abuse experienced in childhood between both of these groups. Female sexual offenders are also more likely to experience feelings of insecurity and inferiorities in regards to social and sexual contact. So these feelings of inadequacy can often create a problem and an inability to find healthy, appropriate partners. Furthermore, severe sexual abuse has been linked to low self-esteem and the prevalence of role confusion. So by role confusion, I mean that mothers often will over-rely on their children for their emotional needs rather than seeking it from an appropriate source. And it can sometimes progress to relying on their children for their sexual needs as well. This makes sense if you look at the victim characteristics of female sexual offenders, because they are more likely to victimize their own children or children they provide care to. So in regards to substance abuse comparison between female sexual offenders and non-sexual offenders, there wasn't much difference in the levels, but female sexual offenders were more likely to abuse alcohol, whereas non-sexual offenders were more likely to abuse drugs. So that is the end of my presentation.